The reckoning of Judge Monroe, when power misjudged justice. The atmosphere in courtroom 14B was thick with tension, the kind you could slice with a paperclip. Every seat was filled, and even the hallway outside was lined with reporters, law students, and off-duty clerks drawn to the drama like moths to a flame. The case itself state of Maryland v. Vance Technologies had already gained national attention due to the billions at stake, the environmental damage under scrutiny, and the presence of a star defendant. But none of that compared to the heat that hit when Isadora Lancaster stepped onto the witness stand. Isadora was no ordinary defendant. She was a powerhouse, CEO of one of the nation's largest energy infrastructure firms. Lancaster held a personal net worth exceeding $3 billion. Her empire stretched from Los Angeles to Boston, and her face was as familiar to the business world as the Apple logo. Clad in custom beige Armani and wrapped in quiet arrogance, she entered that courtroom as if she were walking into a hostile board meeting ready to dominate. Across the room sat Judge Joyce Monroe, a striking figure, tall and composed. Her dark skin contrasted with the crisp ivory of her robes. Her courtroom was known for discipline, for structure, and above all, for integrity. Those who came seeking chaos usually left bruised, not physically but legally, morally, spiritually. Monroe was justice in motion. She'd risen from humble beginnings in the south side of Chicago, paid her way through Howard Law, and made a name for herself prosecuting corporate fraud before ascending to the bench. And yet, in that moment, Lancaster didn't see any of that. She saw a black woman in a robe and nothing more. The proceedings were tense. Expert witnesses detailed environmental violations. Economists debated market monopolization, and lawyers argued in meticulous tones. Lancaster's attorneys, a dozen strong, moved like a choreographed legal ballet. But Monroe was unimpressed. She cut through bloated statements with surgical focus, demanded clarity from both sides, and maintained unwavering neutrality. But everything snapped during cross-examination on the fourth day. Lancaster, called to the stand by the prosecution, had been stonewalling. When asked about the rapid expansion of her company's offshore drilling operations and the resulting ecological damage, she rolled her eyes and offered curt, rehearsed replies. Then Monroe leaned slightly forward from the bench. "Ms. Lancaster, please answer the question. The court has been patient, but you are under oath." Lancaster scoffed. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "maybe you should leave business affairs to people who understand them." A few gasps fluttered across the courtroom. But she wasn't done. "I'm not here to explain economics to someone who got lucky wearing a robe," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Let's be honest, this trial is a circus, and I'm being judged by someone who wouldn't even get past the front desk at my headquarters." Dead silence. The words hung in the air, so poisonous, so precise, they struck the entire room silent. It wasn't just a dig. It was a declaration. A billionaire, on trial for endangering communities and falsifying environmental reports, had just looked a federal judge dead in the eye and dismissed her as unworthy, as incompetent, as inferior. But Monroe didn't flinch. She didn't shout, didn't retaliate. Instead, she calmly reached for her gavel and gave it a single, deliberate strike. "Court will recess for 1 hour," she said evenly. "Ms. Lancaster, I suggest you speak with your counsel. And choose your next words very carefully." As the crowd murmured, the judge stood and exited through the door behind her bench, her back tall, her movements slow and exacting. She didn't need to slam the door or raise her voice. The storm had already begun. Outside the courtroom, the moment went viral. A junior journalist named Jordan Sims captured the entire exchange on a live stream that spread like wildfire. Twitter exploded. Instagram Reels reposted the moment with hashtags like Lancaster out of line and Monroe stands tall. Opinion pieces flooded the internet within hours, questioning not just Lancaster's decorum, but her racial bias, her entitlement, and what it meant for justice when wealth tried to trample dignity. Back inside chambers, Monroe didn't rage. She didn't crumble. She simply sat, took a sip of water, and stared at a framed photo on her desk. Her mother, Ruth Monroe, who'd cleaned houses for a living and taught her daughter to speak truth even when her voice shook. That image reminded her why she wore the robe in the first place. When court resumed, Monroe returned without announcement, but the air had changed. Gone was the sterile professionalism. In its place was a slow-brewing reckoning. "Ms. Lancaster," Monroe began, voice steady as steel, "you are reminded you are under oath. You may continue with your testimony if you are able to do so with respect for this institution." Lancaster shifted in her seat, visibly irritated. But the tide had turned. The prosecution's lead attorney, Angela Brooks, seized the moment. She picked apart the corporate memos, emails, and financial trails that tied Lancaster directly to the falsified inspection records and falsified environmental reports. Monroe allowed the prosecution to continue uninterrupted for nearly 2 hours. Lancaster, once so poised, began unraveling. She interrupted. She denied. She contradicted herself. Monroe didn't blink. And then came the real blow. The prosecution introduced a whistleblower. Michael Epps, a former compliance officer at Advanced Technologies, took the stand with trembling hands and a USB drive. "This," he said, holding it up, "contains 2 years' worth of internal audio files. Most of them feature MS. Lancaster discussing how to bury reports, pressure EPA regulators, and manipulate public data to keep profits up." Lancaster's face paled. Her lawyers objected furiously, but Monroe overruled them after reviewing the chain of custody and authenticity reports. And then came the audio. They played one clip, just 35 seconds. It was Lancaster's voice, unmistakable, laughing. "Who cares if a few coastal towns get murky water?" she said on tape. "By the time they figure it out, we'll already be in the Caribbean with new assets. Let them sue." Silence. The courtroom went still. Monroe leaned forward. "Ms. Lancaster, would you care to explain that statement?" The billionaire said nothing. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom drama became national news. The Justice Department opened additional investigations. Environmental watchdog groups demanded full audits of Lancaster's subsidiaries. Investors began pulling out of Advanced Technologies, stock prices plunging nearly 46% in a matter of days. But what stayed with the public wasn't just the corporate downfall. It was that moment when power tried to belittle principle and failed. Judge Monroe became a quiet icon. She didn't give interviews, didn't publish a memoir, didn't go on late-night TV. But her image frozen in that scene, where she sat calmly as Lancaster tried to insult her, became a symbol. A portrait of dignity. A mural appeared in Baltimore less than a month later. Monroe, hand raised, gavel in mid-strike. Behind her the words, "Respect is not yours to withhold." Lancaster, meanwhile, was indicted on multiple federal charges: perjury, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and environmental violations. Her bail hearing was a fiasco, and Judge Monroe recused herself, allowing another district judge to proceed. But the public knew where the tide turned. It turned not because of the money Lancaster wielded, but because Monroe refused to bow. A year later, when the case closed, Lancaster was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison, plus restitution in the billions. Her empire collapsed. Her board dissolved. Her legacy tainted not just by greed, but by the arrogance that blinded her to the power of principle. As for Monroe, she remained on the bench, quietly, resolutely, until one day she received a handwritten letter. It was from a young girl in Nebraska. "I saw you stand up without yelling. You didn't fight with fists, you fought with silence. When I grow up, I want to be a judge like you." Monroe read it once, then again, and smiled. Because in that moment, she knew justice didn't need money to speak. It just needed someone brave enough to listen, and even braver to act.